So I was watching this film in the hope that I would get a video in for the lead up to Christmas. Well, that didn't happen. But it did get me thinking about something else. This bit of music is clearly a direct reference to Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker. And I think other bits of the score make reference to Tchaikovsky too, especially the way Williams uses his instruments. This is clearly intentional, and I think we're supposed to notice it. The Nutcracker has become a classic Christmas staple, and so when Williams makes reference to it, we draw these Christmassy connections in our mind. In this sense, Williams's music here is a pastiche of Tchaikovsky. It's an overt, intentional imitation of his style. We're expected to recognize and understand the references he's making. So, pastiche in music is an acceptable form of imitation, of referencing someone else's work. And generally when we hear pastiche, we think of it as a tribute to that person's work, or maybe a parody of that person's work. Composers have done this for generations, like Robert Schumann in his piece Carnival. This piece musically depicts the different guests at a party, so when he writes a movement in the style of Chopin, it's a tribute to his friend's work, but it also suggests that Chopin was there at the party. Another acceptable form of imitation is musical quotation, if it serves the context well. Great composers have been doing this for generations. Here, Elgar quotes Beethoven's Calm Sea and Prosperous Voyage, so to wish his friend a safe journey to Australia. And here, Benjamin Britten quotes Shostakovich during World War II. As if to say, I support you, even if your own country does not. So, pastiche and quotation are both acceptable forms of imitation, because they are conscious of their imitation and they serve the artistic purpose at hand. But when I was thinking about this, I was remembering the many arguments that John Williams is a thief, that he has stolen or plagiarized almost every theme or musical idea that he ever wrote. We're no longer talking about pastiche or quotation, but about downright theft. These claims may be a little exaggerated, but I wanted to look at their arguments a little deeper. First, there's the argument that John Williams steals his themes. Let's look at some examples. Perhaps most famously, people say that the title theme from Star Wars is basically the same as Erich Korngold's overture to King's Row. Or they say that Darth Vader's theme is similar to Chopin's Funeral March. I've heard it claimed that one of his love themes was stolen from Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto. And perhaps the biggest stretch of all, that the two-note theme from Jaws was stolen from the finale of Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. On the surface, from what I've just shown you, these all seem like very reasonable comparisons, or accusations. While we can never say for sure that he stole any of these themes, they certainly sound similar, but that's only on the surface, and that's really where the similarities end. Let's look closer. I'll start with Jaws versus Dvorak. So sure, Dvorak starts with these two notes, and again. But then what does he do? He expands them, he makes the interval wider and wider, building up tension. Then we hear these two notes harmonized and developed in the upper register. This isn't really a theme, this is the introductory build-up. It's extremely clear when the main theme comes. Whereas in Jaws, we get the hint of the theme much more subtly. And then again. But then it takes on its own intense rhythmic pattern. These two notes actually become the theme, and it has its own accents, counter melodies, and so on. So yes, the first two notes are the same, at face value. But the way that each composer uses these notes, the actual content of the piece, is completely different. After all, there are only 12 notes in the Western scale to choose from, but the content of these two pieces, for me, shows them to be entirely different. So what about the love theme and Tchaikovsky's violin concerto? Well, again, yes, it starts with a very similar melodic contour. However, the character of these two themes, the orchestration, and especially the harmony, but also even the direction in which the two composers take their themes, are entirely different. Tchaikovsky's is a gentle, folky theme, dressed in complete simplicity. Whereas the love theme is this luscious, ultra-romantic music whose melody goes in literally the opposite direction from Tchaikovsky, and if anything, at least in this case, Williams' harmony is more creative and complex. Now, what about the biggie, the Star Wars main theme and Korngold's King's Row? It's quite possible that Williams was influenced by King's Row, that he took these first 5 notes and ran with them. Is this stealing? Is this influence? I mean, how could you not be influenced by one of the greatest film composers of the earlier 20th century? What's even wrong with that? But to say that it's complete theft is just wrong. Yes, the first 5 notes are the same, and there is a lot that seems similar at face value. But the phrase structure and the way the overall melodies are crafted, the direction that each one goes in, are totally different. In Korngold, these 3 notes come midway through the phrase, as it spells out a traditional cadence pattern. It's also slower, more regal, and its phrase is just much shorter, period. In Star Wars, these same 3 notes are passed off quickly as triplets, almost like decorative passing notes. The overall phrase is much longer, so the 3 notes don't carry the same weight or significance that they do in the Korngold. Again, the surface is similar, but the actual content of the music is very different. But what about examples which sound almost like exact copies of something else? This leads me to my second major point, directors and temp tracks. So this part from Star Wars sounds extremely similar to this section of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. So it's easy to just say, oh, he stole it. But in the job of a film composer, you need to remember that your job is first and foremost to serve the director's vision. On the set of Star Wars, it's said that George Lucas used to play Stravinsky to set the mood for his weird and wonderful worlds. It's perfectly possible that he used Stravinsky as a temp track as well. That is, a temporary soundtrack for the scene, to keep people happy while the composer writes the real thing. It's not uncommon for directors to fall in love with their temp tracks and ask their composer to pretty much copy it. Stanley Kubrick famously fired the great film composer Alex North because he'd fallen in love with the temp tracks, the classics from Richard and Johann Strauss, which have now become iconic in those scenes. More recently, I was watching Captain Phillips, and it seemed clear to me that in this scene, the director had probably used Hans Zimmer's Time as a temp track, and then fallen in love with it and asked the composer to write something just like it, but just different enough to avoid a lawsuit.
It's okay, take your time. Take your time. There's a 2-centimeter laceration on the left eyebrow. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
This practice isn't unusual, and it's an issue with being a film composer. You sometimes have to sacrifice originality in order to serve the director's very specific vision, whether you agree with it or not. Which leads me on to my final thought. Authenticity. We as a society are for some reason obsessed with a musician being authentic. This is especially the case in pop music, where many will disregard or turn their noses up at the top 100 charts because they're crap. This isn't real, honest music, written and expressed authentically, they'll say. This is inauthentic crap churned out to make money. And perhaps they're right. We like our musicians to be original, authentic, to express themselves with honesty in whatever form or style that may come. They mustn't be writing for money or for fame. They must be writing for the sake of their art. These high ideals for what a composer should be probably came from the almost mythological spectre of Beethoven, who, as he fell deaf, retreated away from society and wrote increasingly more challenging, revolutionary, and intensely expressive music, not for the sake of his patrons or to please people, but for the sake of his art. But the problem is that these ideals of authenticity, originality, honest expression are not necessarily the job of a film composer. I say it again, a film composer's primary task is to serve the director's vision. So even if sometimes a film score seems unoriginal, derivative, or inauthentic, the composer may well be doing exactly what was asked of them. They may well be doing their job. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's great to be back and have a little bit of spare time to actually make some videos over the holidays. Hopefully I'll be able to get a few more done before I go back to the States. Please do subscribe and share this if you enjoyed it, and let me know what you might like to see in future. Thanks for watching.